Hello, movie lovers. Welcome home. My name is Amy Henserling, and you are listening to Watch This List Unplugged. This is the third episode in my Amy's Progress series where I am interviewing my favorite people, the smartest people I know, the wisest people I know, on my own mental, spiritual journey to health. Today is particularly special for me. It is October 1st, 2023. Swart and I chose this date. Well, we didn't choose this date. It was meant to be, right? Because it is a special day for him. So Swart, tell us a little bit, give us a little bit of background of the connection between this movie and this day for you. Also, hi.
Hi. So today is my 5 years sober date. 2018 is when I stopped drinking. I took the sober October challenge and stayed sober for 30 days, and it's really interesting. Last night or whenever we started talking, or I watched your other two podcasts of this. I really enjoyed them, by the way. And I thought, I asked you, are you going to do First Reformed? And you said, yeah. Do you want to do it? And I'm like, okay. But then I went back.
Not what I meant, Amy, but.
But I went back and looked at it, and the date was, my review in Letterboxd was October 18th, 2018. So I wasn't even through the 30 days yet. And then as I was watching the movie last night, the journaling and all that, it really hit me. I'm like, I'm getting some deja vu here. Because I think at the time I was in such a fog of just trying to make it through the 30 days that I didn't realize. But I started writing like a sober blog to kind of help me. And I think this influenced it because the first entry on that was October 27th, 2018. And the thing that I wrote that day was probably the most personal thing. I still think it's the best thing that I ever wrote. And I've kind of been trying to chase that ever since. But I didn't even realize that this had influenced it at all until I watched this movie back again. So I feel like this is kind of meant to be in some ways.
Yeah, I do. I think it's also, I use the word providence a lot in my life, but I think it's providential for me as well because your date coincides with mine. So my 90-day is 10/4 because my last drink was on July 4th this year. And I think that watching this film back yesterday or 2 days ago as more clear-minded, right? Like getting out of that fog is a very different experience than first seeing it. And it really, really struck me what Schrader's able to see and how much it really is about addiction, particularly the denial stage. I sort of wanted to open this up by us saying that because this is going to inform a lot of how this is read once we get into this film. And that Swart and I have also had conversations about just not just Letterboxd in general, but how like in our culture it's hard to talk about these things with a sort of openness, but that's what heals, right? Is our stories. So this is also something I feel like is important for you and I.
Yeah. Congratulations on 90 days, by the way. That's hard to do.
Congrats on 5 years. I can't even imagine. That's incredible.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that anymore, but I know those first few months were really difficult. So I'm with you there.
Yeah, they are. And that's something that we'll talk about when we get into this too, is just that first admittance, being able to see what's going on. So with that, I'm going to say movie related, we're going to spoil the heck out of this thing. if you haven't seen
Oh,
First
goody.
Reformed.
I get to do it
uh,
for real this time.
Andy loves spoilers and does not shy away. So we are going to go through this film start to finish. So watch this movie and then come back and be with us. So the first thing I want to do, Swart, is give us a little bit of a plot, just a basic plot summary of what this movie is about, and then how you think it compares to other Schraders, just briefly.
I think it's, well, plot wise, there's not a ton of plot. I mean, it's a priest who's in this little tiny church from like I think the 1700s,
Mm.
and they're going to go through their like reconsecration, his 250th anniversary. So he's kind of dealing with that stuff, and at the same time, this pregnant pregnant lady comes to him with a problem with her husband that he is trying to deal with, and it becomes I don't want to say out of control, but like some things happen. We can spoil
Yeah.
those later if you want,
Yeah. Whenever.
involving a suicide. And we find out too his background, and then it kind of changes the perception of the film because his background was he was in the military. His son, he forced his son into the military, and then he died in the Iraq War, and that all kind of ties into what this other lady's going through with her husband, or I don't even know if they're married. Maybe they're not.
Yeah, I think they are.
Um,
Yeah.
and then we find out that he's kind of secretly hammering down booze at night in the back of the church. He's got a little apartment in the back of this little tiny church. And he writes this journal, almost like, it's like a lot of it's very Taxi Driver, I think. And he's just, there's a narration. It's kind of similar. There's these little throwbacks to it. There's a little bit of hardcore influence in there, but not a ton. But it's definitely, the guy like goes on a journey. And then the ending is just, it's pretty powerful, shocking. There's a cut to black, almost like a Soprano style final episode thing. And yeah, he's dealing with his alcoholism, but he's not really, because
Right.
I don't think he thinks he has a problem.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, he seems to be in complete denial. I mean, and then he's even in denial, like he has like the stomach cancer forming, and he's in denial about that. And that was kind of hard for me to see that too, because that was kind of like reminded me of my dad when he had cancer, and he's kind of in denial about it. And it's like, I don't know. There's like, it's filled with symbolism, I want to say too.
You can
Really.
feel like Schrader's influences like very heavily because he like
Mhm.
Diary of a Country Priest and Winter Light. You can feel like there's like cinematic influences too. But then yeah, like it brings you back to hardcore with the descent into darkness, and Light Sleeper with the narration and the journal. I mean, all of his movies, the dude has a journal, card counter, and he's drinking whiskey while he's writing in the dark. Um,
Yes. I mean, some of the journaling, even, I mean, some of the narration even reminded me of like Full Metal Jacket, or even Ghost Dog a little bit when he's reading the Bible passages. I always like movies like that because it kind of, you're stopping and thinking and getting into the mind of the character a little bit.
mhm,
But his mind is like, you think it's like totally clear because he's a pious priest in the beginning, but it's
mhm.
like you begin to realize like his mind is like mush, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. Um, so it's interesting.
One phrase that you used in your review that I like underlined and wrote down was terminally lost.
Yeah.
So that's sort of that's kind of what I wanted to begin with, is that there's two parts to this movie in my view. There's hope and despair, right? And he's saying that those are the things that are opposed.
Mm-hmm.
So if we start with the despair, we have a guy who is in several scenes where he's told that he has a problem. The organist finds all these whiskey bottles in his trash. The doctor asks him how much he drinks, and he says, "Oh, I have wine every now and then."
Mm-hmm.
His boss is like, "You have a problem and you need to go to rehab," and he's like, "Well, I just have some stomach issues." So to
Mm-hmm.
me, and you can tell me what you think, he has not even, he can't see clearly
No.
at all. And then everyone around him is very aware that he has this problem. And so when Mary comes into the picture and is talking about her husband Michael's problems, he's able to see them, but also not, because he can't clearly see himself.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's when he maybe sees a little inkling of it because he sees his own life in it, but he's so terminally lost that he can't get out of his own way in some ways, and make that connection to, hey, I got to fix this. It's just like, this is what it is, and it just, it's almost like this Taxi Driver thing where it's just going to keep going and going and going until it gets to this, weird crash at the end, where something has to happen. Something's forcing him to happen, like the ending with everyone gathering in the church for the 250th anniversary. Like, that's life forcing a decision on you. And I don't know that he was just completely unprepared to deal with it, because he won't even let the thought enter his mind that he might have a problem. He can't get past the fact of what his father did to him and he did to his child. And he just doesn't feel like he can be redeemable. He doesn't feel like he can be forgiven. So it's like this mental block in some ways.
It's like really a movie about self-loathing. And
It
then,
is.
and I think about this a lot now that I am on the other side of it, and I pray that I will always be. But there's this saying that alcoholics have a death wish because we're drinking poison.
Yep.
So what the film does, and what I think Schrader does sort of brilliantly, is in addition to watching him not admit it, right?
Yep.
We're given all these other things about the world, like the environment being destroyed, climate change, how like the question of like, what are we doing to God's creation?
Yep.
Where is God? What do we do about it? Because the character of Michael is so overwhelmed, like he literally cannot handle it.
Yeah.
And doesn't know what the answer is. Wants to like have an abortion because he's wrestling with bringing in a child into the world that has no hope, because he can't see hope, right? And that's what this comes down to, is that neither character is able to see a way forward.
Yeah, and I think what the film does so brilliantly, and like it has that moving like speech that he gives, which is way in the beginning. I forgot how far in the beginning of the film that is, with about the two truths. But then you see over and over again how that's possible, because you can have someone who is a complete a-hole like the husband, but he's also fighting for something that's good, which is climate change and don't ruin the planet. But at the same time, he doesn't realize like how that's going to affect his child, how that's going to affect other people. And I think that's why there's a humor to the film too. Like when he dies and they sprinkle his ashes, and the church choir sings this Neil Young protest song. Like, I can't stop laughing at that. But at the same time, like, people can be good, but they can also be complete idiots. And that's kind of like the priest too. Like, he could be awesome. He's feeding the homeless. They show all these things he's doing but at the same time, he's killing himself for really no reason at all, other than his own mind and
Grief.
guilt and grief. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. And then he is sort of preaching to empty pews.
Yep.
And it is, there's an aspect to this that's almost like, I think it's in like the Big Book, I think, where it's talking about like the myth of heroic sacrifice, where we can convince ourselves that we can save something just by caring about it. And so his actions towards the end, where it's like he wants to put the suicide vest on and blow everything up as a sort of statement is actually selfish, because
Yeah.
all he wants to do is die anyway. But, the rationalization and the brain convinces itself, like, I'm doing this for a larger purpose. So it's an interesting thing that Schrader's doing. He's not just calling to attention, kind of like Aronofsky's mother, calling to attention, like, we're destroying everything, we're ruining everything. Where is God? Will he forgive us? There's all these existential questions, right? But
Mm-hmm.
then there's also, like, you have this person who conveniently will take those things and use it as an excuse not to live.
Yeah.
Because Amanda Seyfried's character says to him, when he's like, I wish I had been able to do something, she's like, I'm the spiritual one. He didn't want to live,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
So
She sees it like more than anybody in that film, even though she rarely even speaks. She's like
mhm.
she's like the outsider looking in some ways, trying to guide these souls. Like she's almost an angel in some ways. Reminded me a lot of Elizabeth Shue in Leaving Las Vegas in some ways. Kind of guiding this troubled soul to the next area of his life, almost. But he doesn't see it. He doesn't see it. Nicolas Cage doesn't see it in that film. It's just this downward spiral. But at the same time, the ending is a little bit hopeful for a Schrader film, because like a lot of it is recalling Taxi Driver, and like I think I talked about this when I wrote that thing 5 years ago.
You did.
This is almost like Scorsese's Silence, where it's this old man trying to figure out if his faith really meant anything to him. I thought those two films were a lot alike. Obviously, Schrader's is a lot darker, but I think if you look at this versus Taxi Driver at the end, there is a little bit of hope. I don't think there's a ton of hope at the end of Taxi Driver. So I think you're seeing his evolution as a person, as a filmmaker, and a writer. And I think that really spoke to me at the time, when I was just trying to first stay sober.
Right. Even though he doesn't sort of go through that journey, but you can feel how real it is. It also heavily reminds me of Last Temptation too, because Schrader was going through this sort of the same thing, except with the character of Jesus, where it's like he had a lot of despair. He looked around him and was like, people are destroying themselves. What can we do? And then with this, I think you're right. Like the answer is finding God through human contact. It's basically love, right?
It
or
is.
the love of a good woman, if you want to be like really specific.
Or your children, because she's going to have a son. Now, I mean, obviously he's got cancer, but he could keep going. When the movie stops, he could keep going down the path he's on, or he could go get help, get treatment for his cancer, and then raise this boy and have a second chance because she's pregnant with a boy. So it's kind of showing that we have a choice. You always have a choice. Like the most important thing to me in this film is when he's on the little board and he's saying, "Will God forgive us?" or whatever it says, and then it kind of pans over, and then there's garbage cans that say First Reform, and that's when they first find the alcohol in there, all those alcohol bottles. But it's just showing that he's always saying, why does God destroy his creation? Why can't he forgive us? And I think that scene, without even saying any words, just shows that the only person that can do it is yourself. And that's really when it comes down to stop drinking or any kind of addiction. Like you have to do it yourself. Someone can't do it for you. Your kids can't do it for you. Your wife can't do it for you. You have to do it yourself. And I think that's what he shows in this versus some of his other films.
It's the line that I quoted to you from Adaptation when Cage meets with McKee in the bar.
Yeah.
And he's asking how to end his film. And McKee says, your characters must change and the change must come from them.
Yes.
It's the same thing. So the opening line, I think about this a lot now. The opening line to the 12-step book is who can admit complete defeat. And I think about that a lot because it is the first step. It is the Like, most painful part is the admittance. And then this kind of calls to mind when I first asked you when I was going through my pain, which was excruciating and unmanageable.
Yeah.
I asked you why you became sober, and you said because you want to see things as they really are.
Yeah. That's kind of what I kept telling myself. And what you say is true. Like you have to accept that you can't control it, and that's most people can't do that, especially in this day and age, and everybody, it's just everywhere, and I didn't think I'd ever be able to, look at another beer commercial. Like I never, I never had any, like I had a zero Heineken 0.0 last night. And I, for the first 3 or 4 years, I couldn't do that, cause I was so worried that I would just start again. And
Mm-hmm.
you have to treat yourself almost like you're a different type of person than everybody else, because it's so ingrained in society. And you just have to say, look, this is me. I'm different. I can't control it at all. And growing up, you just around people that are like that, and they can control it somehow, even though you can't. So you have to say, this is it. I got to just do it a different way. And it's hard.
And I think that there's a facet to this where you are managing. So the more that you feel that your life is actually not that bad and that you're doing okay, that's just going to prolong it. And some
Yep.
people never feel that it's unmanageable, even though it is.
Absolutely.
It is. But you feel that you are getting through it and that you're fine, that you can stop. And there's all these rationalizations in your head, that keep you from even considering. And so it's kind of like what this movie brought to mind is that this is a person with such a low bottom that you want something to happen that will shake the person into,
Yeah.
like, I want to see, because until you can, yeah, you're right.
And then
Until
getting
you
cancer
can.
can't do that, then what can,
Oh, I mean,
that's
people
how
can.
low
Yeah,
he is. Yeah.
right. Yeah, it is amazing the level. You would think where you'd be like, oh, well, this person will get it now. No.
No.
Because we all have to be, we don't see things unless we're forced to see them a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
So and Schrader was himself an addict, so I think this is something that he is like intimately familiar with. Now, I do want to pivot and say there are parts of this movie that I think are very on the nose and somewhat distracting. I don't know if you feel this way, but like having the characters literally named Mary and Joseph,
Yeah.
and Michael,
Yes.
having the barbed wire as sort of like a crown of thorns.
Yep.
Schrader is not very subtle, and it can be somewhat distracting. Rob had a great review, our comics Rob, where he was talking about it was a little bit gimmicky, where if he was noticing the way that something was shot, that was not necessarily a good sign. So if you could just like tell me what you think about if there's any part of this film that feels sort of distracting.
I think all of it is like that in a way, but I think at the time I was watching it, I needed that over the top symbolism, because I just couldn't see it. I couldn't see it. And really, honestly, though, the thing, even the fact that he's just journaling and writing this and narrating, and he sounds just like Taxi Driver, even that is like completely just derivative. But at the same time, like, it speaks to all the people that, the toxic masculinity of people who grew up watching Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, all this stuff, even like Fight Club, and completely missed the point of those films, right? And I think that's what this does. Like, it shows it to you in a way like, here, you're an idiot. You need to see this. It's right in front of your face. And to me, that type of symbolism, over the top symbolism, was something that I needed. And even rewatching it now, I still feel like I need that, because I miss that stuff. I miss the stuff that's sitting right in front of my face.
Right. Okay, so you feel like the unsubtlety is sort of like a 2x4 too, but it's like it's an effective one. It's not one
Yeah.
that like removes you from the story. It's one that like immerses you in it.
Well, because you have this shared knowledge of what Schrader is and what Schrader's movies are, right? So it's moving along, and you're like, okay, this ending's going to be explosive. This is going to be nuts. I can't wait for this. He's going to blow everybody up. This is going to be so nuts. And you get to the end, and he's about to drink that Drano, and you're like, oh my god, he's going somewhere. He's this old guy's nuts. And then all of a sudden, boom, she shows up, and it's like, whoa, I haven't seen that in a Schrader film. That's kind of like the table flip for me was like, okay, I don't have to root for these anti-heroes. I don't have to, I can like things that are cheesy. I can like things that are over the top and 2x4 to the head. And I think just seeing that open things up for me, like, hey, I can find things that are good to, like I watched Elemental with my kids, and everyone just bashed that movie, just thrashed it. So I didn't watch it. I think it was their third time watching it before I watched it. And I'm like, well, you know what? This isn't that bad. It's teaching them some good lessons, and I can find some good in this. And that's all quitting drinking was for me, to find good in things, which I didn't, where I would just numb. If it was something was bad, I'd just go hide and go into my escape hatch and just, and I have to find those good things now, or I just can't do it.
And I think it's also, so there's a book I'm reading called Breathing Underwater by Richard Rohr, where he connects spirituality in the 12 steps. And he talks about addiction being deeply frustrated desire.
Yeah.
So there's all this energy that we have, right? And passion that is misguided and turned destructive, right? Where and we can justify being depressed or being sad because we're like, look at the state of the world, and look at how awful everything is. And I'm not trying at all. I know that there's like, I'm privileged, and I am to say that. So I'm not trying to say that those things aren't valid, but to believe that you can't make a difference, or that your truth and your experience has no meaning.
Yeah.
That's despair.
That's complete despair. You're right.
Right. And that is what renders us useless.
Yeah. And I felt useless until I saw, him journaling and stuff. And I had been reading, I think at the time I had been reading sober blogs a lot. And I was like, well, these are dumb. But, I had all these feelings, when you first get sober, you have all these feelings and you don't know what to deal with it. You don't know how to deal with it. And, I just started writing. And there's a line in the beginning of the film where he says, like, you have to be completely, I don't know, I got to look it up now. When writing about oneself, one should show no mercy. And I think that's what I started to do. And the more I did that, the more people were like, well, that helped me, or you going through that. I felt that because I did this happened with this. And I felt like, well, I can be the cheesy sober guy, which one of my friends called me that one time in the beginning. And I felt bad about it, but he's like, you're using it to get attention, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, it's the only way I know how to channel these feelings and get them out of me. And so that's really the way I looked at it, is just like getting the shit out of me so I can fill myself up with other things that are good.
Detoxing.
Yeah. Yep. And everybody does that in a different way. Like if you look at addicts, like they get addicted to rock climbing or there's people that are runners and run like crazy. And I'm like, that ain't for me. I'm just going to write, and you have to find that passion that doesn't involve, sitting on a bar stool.
It's almost like there's this like danger initially where people say that addicts will get addicted to sobriety.
Absolutely. That is totally true. That is totally
and that
true.
The tendency is to just replace with something else.
Absolutely.
But Crimes and Misdemeanors, the Woody Allen film, is also fresh in my mind, where there's a scene at the dinner table and they're saying, what if it ends up that there is no God, to his father, who is a Jew, like a, he really believes, and they're doing Seder, and he's like, what if in the end it turns out that there is no God and this, all that you did was for nothing? He says, I still would have had a better life than you.
Yeah.
And so it's like,
that's pretty hard hitting.
Okay. Right. So you're thinking, like, for people who might say, what if this is all baloney? Okay. And that we can't make a difference and we can't affect things, and it's all going down the tubes. It's like, okay, then you have two options. You can either care about your health and try to get better and pray that you get to the point where you can see, because it is grace that I can see.
Yeah.
Or you keep on operating in that way. But either way, right, you do have a choice, like you said. You and you have more influence than you think as well.
Yeah, that's that's kind of the scary part. Like, because I've had people say, I saw you doing it, so then I thought I could do it, and you're like, what? Me? I mean, I'm just an idiot. Who cares? I'm just doing this to see if I can do it, to challenge myself. And they're like, I said, well, if you could do it, then anybody can do it, type of thing. And
right,
those are the type of moments you have to live for.
Well, and I think we're drawn to circumstances and situations that we feel have the answer.
Yeah.
And we're drawn to people that we want to be like.
Yeah.
So if you can sort of invest in yourself to become what you would want to be like, if you think about it in those terms.
Well, it's really it's the corny thing where
motivating.
You put your airbag on before, or your air mask on before anybody else.
Air mask on.
Yeah.
Right. So if we look at the film in terms of the supporting characters, and we see this as like, that there's that like thing about that this person prayed and God sent a helicopter and God sent this other thing, and then the guy dies because he's drowning, and he goes to heaven, and he's like, why didn't you answer my prayer? And he's like, I sent you this person, this.
Mm-hmm.
You just didn't see it as me. Is there a way, do you think, to interpret this film as sort of him being surrounded by people that are trying to help him but just not being aware of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a scene in the film with, I think her name's Esther, and it's clear that they had some sort of relationship. That's another thing I love about the movie, is like it's just like, you're just in it, right? There's no backstory, there's no flashback. You're like, oh, these guys did something together, and you don't know for sure what it is, but it's enough that when they have that conversation in the staircase, it's one of the most brutal things that I've seen in a movie ever. When he says that he despises her and she makes him be something that he doesn't want to be. I couldn't believe that was coming out of the mouth of a priest. But it also shows that people are people. He's going to have, even if he is a priest, he's still going to have those feelings. And is it over the top? Yeah, it is. But sometimes you need to see those things happening, and like, oh my God, this lady just literally the only person in the film that cares if you went and got checked up for, got a scan or whatever, see if you have cancer, and that's the way you treat her. It's pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, he says, like, you want something that never was, and that she reminded him of everything that he hates. It's brutal. It's good in a way. I think that this almost is more effective in that sense, or relatable, than Taxi Driver, because he's a priest.
Absolutely.
So this is somebody that we're supposed to
look up to them, like I grew up in,
right.
My parents were like, or my grandparents were like hardcore Catholics, like diehard Catholics. And you grew up seeing the priests as like, they're like the father figures, like they take care of the flock, all this, and they're almost not human in some ways. And to see that happening, like, I think if I would have saw a priest do that when I was 10 years old, it would have just blew my mind, just would have wrecked everything that was built in there built up by my parents or grandparents or whatever. because they're almost like parental figures, and they're not supposed to act like that. And you see him doing all of his priest stuff, and then all of a sudden he does that, and you're like, whoa, something is truly, truly off with this guy. Like way off. Like he's faking it in this situation, but he can't when he gets alone with this person who actually truly cares about him. And the fact that she's the one singing at the end too, I didn't notice that until this watch. Like she's the one singing the Everlasting Arms song, whatever. That it's so messed up, but he's finally finding his way into where he should be in some ways.
Yeah, and then you've got the Balk guy, the evil oil corporation guy, which is also completely not subtle.
Yeah, that stuff kind of bothered me this time around. It was a little bit too much. It was too much.
That's what I'm saying. There is an element here where it is a bit, preachy in the sense of just like not allowing nuance. It's just very in your face.
I think that was kind of the product of the time, though, because it was 2017. And people were really angry about like Trump and all that, all the MAGA stuff was really starting to come out then. And I think, and it was starting to seep into some of the Hollywood movies. And I think if he made it again today, I don't think he would make it that over the top. I really don't. I think it was kind of the product of the time. That's that's the way I saw it this last time I watched it anyway.
Yeah, to put it into historical context is important because it's also everything political, and then even the part in the film where he's like, "Don't politicize this," is something that we used to say during that time a lot. It seemed like
a lot of it was
couldn't do anything.
A lot of it was, seeing the future in some ways because they talk about, how the plague can hit or whatever, and in 2020, the protests, the George Floyd, all that stuff was kind of foretold in that conversation he had with Michael in the beginning, in some ways. And then I think with America, like that was starting to come out, and it had to come to a head, and now it is where it is now. It's not as bad as it was in 2020, but it was still kind of building in 2017. That's why I think it would be completely. There's no way this film would be made the same way today. I don't think. I mean, it would be the same like story, his personal story, but I don't think any of the political stuff would be the same.
Right.
Because there's like a naivete to it.
Or like an urgency as well. I like how he describes when he first meets with Michael that he was like, he has this voiceover and you think it's going to go in a different way, but it actually doesn't. He says, it felt like Jacob wrestling with the angel. And then you think that means that
he liked it.
And he liked it.
Yeah.
He says it was exhilarating.
Yes.
And you think that he's like, this angry millennial, to use your term, it's like all these entitled white kids going on and on about whatever and protesting and people dying and they're not doing anything, the whole like selectivism thing and just that we're just complaining but not doing anything. What are we doing?
Yeah.
How do we care? And then have no action, etc. But instead of having that attitude, which he totally should, based on what he's been through, he's like, it was exhilarating. And to me, that was like,
yeah, it's like
he enjoys this.
That was the height of people arguing about politics on Twitter and Facebook and everywhere else, and arguing with your uncle and your mom and calling people out. And, it's like two trolls fighting in real life. You see that, and then it's almost like he's the one that gets radicalized by Michael in some ways as he takes his laptop and starts going through it. And that whole thing is really cliche, but it kind of helps propel the movie in some ways because he wouldn't have got to where he got to without that. Also, the scene with Michael, the suicide scene, is still, I think, one of the most hardcore things in any Schrader film. I mean, I was not, when I first watched this, I was not expecting it to be that gruesome.
And it just adds to, there's like a line that the oil guy says to him where he's like, hold on a second, So he texted you that morning, and then you counseled him, and he shot himself. And he just says it like
It's
that.
so
Like,
hardcore. Yeah.
it's
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 just
so
blunt trauma.
brutal. Yeah.
Blunt verbal
And, and
trauma.
and and then he's like, "Yeah, that is what happened." And I also, told my wife that my son was going to be in the footsteps of his father and his father before him, and then he got killed.
Yeah.
And it's it's this. It's almost like when you get annoyed that someone that you don't like says the truth, you're like, dang it, why is it this guy?
Yep.
Like when somebody that you're not a fan of has a good take, there's that feeling of like, you're right, but I don't like
could just see like it's like a pile
That's
driver.
what that
just
happened.
Those little statements just driving him further down, and you can see how like if you're in the midst of a hardcore addiction, like just hearing those little things, like if I was drinking and someone did that to me, like I would probably be drunk for 3 days straight. If
Just from hearing
that one line from that rich guy who I hated, who was the corporate sellout guy who's ruining the planet. And that's kind of what it boils down to is, there's the rich against poor thing again, which was really in sharp relief in 2016, 2017, 2018 in that era.
It also kind of inadvertently demonstrates how, like, the truth is the truth no matter where it comes from.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which I think is sort of important to remember, but doesn't really come unless you are coming at it with humility yourself.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know everything, and I can learn from anyone.
Oh, and that is a big sober thing too. Absolutely.
Right.
Like trying to see good in your enemies, or, hey, maybe this guy does have a point, even though I completely disagree with everything about him. That's a great reading of the film, I think, for sure.
Yes, because it's coming from, a lot of people will write off sort of mega churches. A lot of people are very triggered by, it's not necessarily that they have an issue with God. It's more, a lot of times I've found just from hearing people speak about their lack of faith, a lot of times it's the church, right?
Yep.
And it's an experience in the church, and it's the pastor of a big church, and they're turned off by this. So for Schrader to have the big bad guy be the oil business tycoon who does say the truth, but then have Cedric, the entertainer, as the person who's genuinely compassionate, who runs this big ordeal, and he's like trying to say, like, you don't know how hard it is to reach people like he wants to.
He needs that money to reach people. You can see why he's doing it, and that's the two truths things, right? You got this big mega church that's like almost televangelism, and then you got this tiny little old school church, and there's more messed up things going in that little old school church than this giant corporate church that's taking, oil money. And I think that shows that you can be good and be messed up at the same time. That's the whole film right there. That's a great
exactly
film.
Yeah. And how messy it is, that the sort of black and white thinking doesn't really serve us very well in life.
Nope. And that's definitely changed for me once I got sober, because I was very, very anti people, right-wing people, and just people that didn't think like me. And now I think when you get sober, you try to see the commonalities and just kind of get in with the people that way. And another thing too is like, there's people on both sides trying to just change each other. Like, let's just change. I'm gonna radicalize you, and that's kind of what this movie is too. Like, I'm just gonna radicalize you in this way or this way or this way, and that's what's going on at that time period. And we're all human, right? We all have problems, and we all do better when we help each other. And that was hard for me to come to, because it's just such a corny sentiment that I've never felt before. And it's almost like when you start seeing things for they really are, you can see that some of these people, like, they're really hurting. That's why they act like that. And that's why they climb onto these radical things.
Yes. Now, I mean, because I think it's almost like you can't really see other people's pain until you see yours.
Yeah.
And you can't see yours if you're numb to yours.
Yeah, that's
So
exactly it.
the more that you're able to grapple with your own, then the more access that you have to who you are, which is what this entire my pod direction is, for me to have access to myself, right? Amy's progress is basically literally getting through the muck to have access to it's I mean recovery is recovering the best version, right?
Yeah.
Then you can be more sensitive when other people come at you
Yep.
because they're in pain,
Yep.
and you start to notice that, like, you could be in scenarios, any scenario that you walk into, whether it's the grocery store or church or anywhere,
Hmm.
a bar, people are like on the surface in pain
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
the time.
It is, and it's become so normalized that's that's the norm versus people who aren't in pain, and everybody's got a little bit of it, but I think when you take a hard look at yourself, it kind of numbs the pain in a way that's good and healthy versus drinking Drano or whatever your poison is.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that the first scene that Reverend Toller meets Mary, she's literally saying, "Can you meet with my husband?" And he's like, "You should go to Abundant Life."
Yeah, he's
He
passing it off. Yeah, which is
yeah, because
yeah.
so to me that's very telling too, where it's like, here's somebody that's supposed to have the solution, right? And
It's
here's
just too
somebody
much
that
for him.
she's coming to, and he's like, this other church is bigger and I don't have anything. And I think that is also maybe something that Schrader and Scorsese struggle with, where it's like, who am I?
I'm part of the machine type of thing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right. Who am I to supply counsel?
Yeah.
I did cocaine and I'm an alcoholic, and I still struggle. And when in the Ebert review for Last Temptation, he talks about talking to Scorsese, and he says, "Do you think that you're saved?" And
Mm-hmm.
Scorsese says, "No, I think I'm going to hell because I'm living in sin."
Yeah. Yeah, there's some of
And
that in
it's
this
like,
movie too.
right, it's like, whoa. Okay, so if somebody who's wrestling with these things, and is sort of accepted and popular and respected artistically, still feels condemned, then you're still limiting the effect that you can have, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I
you're
think
limiting your
I think it's
influence.
interesting that both of these films were kind of the same time, and then these guys are kind of almost changing as filmmakers in some way, because I know Scorsese went, I think, right to The Irishman after that, which was
Mm-hmm.
a commentary on everything he had done in the past and how it's all bullshit, right? It's all bullshit, and living like that does nothing. It's fun in the moment, but then it's nothing. And I have a feeling that I haven't seen the new Schrader, but I've heard it's kind of more uplifting than normal.
Mm.
So I'm thinking maybe. I mean, he kind of went that way a little bit, the card counter, but the card counter to me wasn't as good as First Reformed. But
No.
I'm interested in seeing how he wraps up his trilogy or whatever, where he's looking inside.
Yeah.
What is he, 80 years old? They're both in their 80s, which is incredible.
Yeah,
just getting
and
that knowledge.
it's that God.
Yeah.
It's that God's lonely man trajectory, sort of the conflicted male who's just trying to figure it out. I mean, I think Scorsese was recently on the cover of a magazine saying he wants to figure out who he really is.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah. That's kind of scary to think that when you're that age, you're still trying to figure out who you really are, but maybe that's the point of humanity.
Yeah, and I think that the goal would be to shorten the window in as much as you can.
Yeah.
Which I still there's this component to it that I don't feel that we are in control of. But in as much as you can, it's like, how can you make the time frame of your ability to be effective, even if it's just for your own sanity, and not be 80 or not be at the end of your life figuring it out,
I think that's
just
important
sooner.
for people of that age, because you're seeing a lot. Like, I work with this stuff every day. Like, boomers really think they can get this instant fix of like, hey, I can take my wrinkles away, I can do a perfect diet, I can do this, I'm going to live forever. But here you have two guys that are just trying to figure it out one film at a time, because that's really what it is. You're just trying to improve yourself by this much every day. It doesn't happen overnight. And if there's one thing I could tell people, it's not going to be this magic thing. It's just a lifestyle change, really, more than anything else. And you have to want to be a better person. And is it going to be easy? No. It sucks in a lot of ways, but eventually you get past the point of, the best thing about getting sober is you see things for what they really are. But at the same time, you also stop caring what other people think so much, because you're seeing so many like posts of people, I'm doing this, I'm so great, I'm doing this. And that used to bother the shit out of me. But now I'm just like, okay, that's what you're doing. I'm not doing that.
And it's also, there's a temptation, I think, in just any scenario to obsess about the problem and articulate it, when it's so much more valuable to be talking about the solution.
Yep.
What is the solution, and how can I get there? What is the answer? And so with First Reformed, unlike, I think, Stalker, there is an actual answer that Schrader offers us, which is love.
Love, yeah.
Right? And it's hard. I read a bunch of reviews that were excellent last night about saying, that it feels simplistic or perhaps naive to just accept that that's the answer.
Yep.
Or to believe that.
Sometimes the easiest choice is the best choice, though. And
right.
we don't want to admit that.
Right. Because it's like, well, you just don't know and you're ignorant, and it's a luxury that you can feel that way. And there's so many things that will prevent your brain from change. A lot of times when I'm thinking something that's self-defeating, it's just because my ego wants me in the status quo.
Yeah.
We're just so resistant to change. And
well, it's as simple as if you don't like something, just don't do it. Just don't do it. Just stop. And it's really hard for people because they have all these scenarios playing in their head, especially someone who's an addict, because you're having all this anxiety, you're having all these, what if this happens and what if that happens, and I don't want, I have really bad social anxiety, so that's why I drank, because I just couldn't be in crowds of people. I just hated it. But there's all these, everybody has something different. And sometimes you just got to step back and be like, it's okay if I don't go to the party. It's okay if I don't, go to the football game, whatever. I can just stay here and just exist. I don't need to be anything more than me. And that's the hardest thing to get through to anybody, even people that aren't addicts.
Yeah, but then you're like, who am I, right?
Yep.
Because there's a process of there's a very real thing that I think all of us sort of use art for, which is, who even am I? And especially as an addict, who am I without this activity?
Oh, 100%, because you change all the things that you're doing. You change, you lose friendships over it. Like, some people have only known that version of you, and they expect a certain thing out of you, and when they don't get it, they're like, who's that guy? I don't know that guy. That's not.
And you do that to yourself. Who am I without this? I mean, it's scary.
It is.
And
it is.
Who am I going to be instead? Like, because there is this sort of sense of emptiness in this hole, and this hunger for something to replace it almost immediately. And then also, I think I like that Schrader has him pour the glass of scotch, pour the scotch on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
fill it with Drano,
Mm-hmm.
and then you get that's because the Drano is the same color as the whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that's what whiskey is.
Yeah, and that's
Like
the most over the top thing in the whole movie.
I
Like, you're
agree.
literally drinking poison, but it's
But
effective.
it's a visual that if you could sort of I know it's hard to make the connection because I was in love with alcohol. It's hard to do because there's this romanticization that happens, and it still happens. But if you can sort of, even conceptually, visualize what Schrader, that's a radical statement.
Oh, it's huge.
For him.
It's huge because
and then for Ethan Hawke's character, for Toller to pour it himself, I think does say something, even though he's still on the barbed wire, even though he's still bleeding. And it's dramatic. I think that gesture says quite a bit.
Well, yeah, it's like the barbed wire is killing him on the outside, but what's really the problem is what's killing him on the inside, I think. And, in the beginning of the movie, you're seeing a writer, a little glass of scotch. That's like, oh, look, it's Ernest Hemingway. Like there's this romantic thing about drinking and writing and getting your thoughts out. And it's not real. It's not real.
And that the moment that he does that is when she shows up.
Right. And you're just so not expecting any of that to happen in a Schrader movie. Like, that's what really got to me. Like, I'm like, okay, he's gonna drink the Drano and he's gonna puke blood all over everybody. And, because they had that song in the beginning is about the blood and the white garments that
the lamb,
the choir's singing. I'm like, that is okay. So that's total Schrader foreshadowing right there. This is going to be a bloody, crazy ending. And it kind of was with the barbed wire and stuff, but it doesn't go in the way you expect it to go. That's what I really love about it.
And I think it's also telling that you think that if you, it kind of reminds me of Abraham in a way. You think that if you're being asked to sacrifice your most precious thing, that it won't be replaced by something good. So I think that the fact that as soon as he does that, she comes to save him is also just so hopeful. I think that's the most hopeful thing that Schrader can say, to be honest with you.
Oh, yeah. Because he sacrificed his son.
As soon as you do something,
yeah,
that something good will immediately happen to you in a like a tangible way, and you just have to have this like modicum of maybe if I give this up, something good will happen. If you can even consider that, I think it's like that. Step 3 talks about willingness being the key, and it just takes so little, but it's also so much. Paradoxically, too, it's so much to get there too. It's such a leap.
Yeah,
when you're in that state.
I don't know how. I think back to now 5 years ago, and I'm just like, how did I end up here? Like it just this is the one thing. Like, wow, this really sucks. I feel sick all the time. I'm fat. I'm going to try this for 30 days. And no matter what happens, I'm going to do it for 30 days. And like, where did that come from? I have no idea. Why couldn't I have done that 5 years earlier? But just that one, all it took was like that one spark, and then you're in a different direction. And that's kind of how the end of that film is. And that's why it's meaningful in some ways to someone, who's going through recovery, or like, it's clear that Schrader had severe addiction problems, just all the stuff that's in that film, that's in all of his films. But to see someone who's had that struggle their whole life and to do that at the end of that film it's impressive to me.
I agree. I think everything is in that ending. And I'm going to read this. This might embarrass you a little bit.
Okay.
But
all right.
I wrote a section of your review, my favorite part of it, that I think summarizes this very well. You wrote about his character. He is Travis Bickle, cast as Joseph the Dreamer, and thrown down a bottomless 21st century well. His coat of many colors is now the black and white smock of the church. Colorless and foreboding, a ghost walking among the tombstones, yearning to become an unmerciful angel of death.
I
So
don't
there
know where that
is,
came from. I don't even
well, there
remember writing
is,
that.
I knew you were going to say
Because I
that,
was still like,
but
when you think about it, you're still in that fog. You know, I've only been 2 or 3 weeks sober. I was still like, the poison's still in you, right? But
but you still saw enough clarity to you're both, I think you're right there in that paragraph, you're addressing the nihilism of that temptation to just the unmerciful angel of death, that we take on that role strangely
yeah,
in how often we fight with each other, how impatient we are, how intolerant we are, how unwilling we are to even consider that something's wrong with us or that we're the problem. That is that unmerciful angel of death, even if it's toward
yeah,
yourself. And so I think that is, you're acknowledging the nihilism and that temptation to go that direction, but you're also saying that he's Joseph in the well.
yeah, and I think that came from, they mentioned that in the movie, I think.
They do,
But
because his son
yeah,
was named Joseph,
yeah, which is another
and
over
he
the
says the
top
dreamer.
biblical reference.
It is.
But, I think
Mm-hmm.
what you're taking out of that is good, because like, I guess I didn't see that at the time, but I was just a complete nihilist. That's all my alcoholism was just nihilism. I mean, in fact, we used to joke about it all the time with my buddies and be like, that line from Big Lebowski, it's, we are nihilists, we care for
I was about to
nothing.
say Big
We
Lebowski.
care for nothing. As we hammer down a White Russian or a whiskey sour,
Right.
or whatever it was we were drinking that day. But yeah, that is just getting over that nihilism. I think that's all it is for me anyway. That's not for
And
everybody.
and you said at the beginning of this that you feel like the thing that you wrote initially was one of the best things that you've written. That came to mind as like that whole chasing the high thing. That
Yep.
That the root of the pain is that you're trying to get back, right, to something. And if you can sort of figure that out, or over time begin to understand, then you can be fulfilled by what you are able to replace it with when you have that awareness. But when you're just operating sort of in a subconscious level all the time and you're not aware, it is like you're living in a completely different reality. You think that your reality is, but it actually isn't at all. The reality I'm in now is the real one.
Yeah, I think you get stuck in that mindset of like, it's got to be like, you are chasing the high, right? So like, I'll write something and be like, people will be like, oh God, that's great. And then the next time you're like, I don't know if I can do that again. You have to be okay with things that suck. That's all sobriety is. You have to be okay with things that suck. And I still struggle with it every day.
Yes.
But it's part of the process. It's part of just getting better inch by inch. And you just got to be a little bit better than the day before, which is not always going to happen. I mean, life's not a straight line. But yeah, just you got to know that feeling isn't going to go away. You just have to deal with it as part of like seeing things how it really is.
But it's like it's going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But you were uncomfortable before.
Yep.
The thing is, all you're doing is swapping pain, bad pain, for good pain, if you want to put it into different terms. And I think that there is, there's the good pain that's exercise and that is improvement. And then there's the bad pain that is illness and deterioration and destruction. And it's not that you are leaving one thing to make your life worse. You are choosing what kind you want to feel.
Yeah.
And then one of them actually gives you access to hope.
It does. And it gives you the skills to deal with pain. Because if you're drinking, you start drinking when you're 17, 18, 16, and you just keep going, you never get those skills. You just never do.
Yeah.
And it's weird when you come out of it. They say it's like, when you come out of it, it's like you start over from where you started when you started drinking. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like you're 17 again and you're relearning how to build relationships with people. You're relearning how to be okay in social situations and not be so self-conscious. And that's why it's so hard in the first, I want to say year, maybe even still for me. But I know now that I step into a room full of people, it's not as bad as it was 5 years ago. And that's
Mm.
because I've had to deal with it. You're forced to deal with it when you're not drinking.
Right. Right. I just realized we created our own little room today.
You did? Yeah.
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 And I I hope that when you guys watch this movie, or if you rewatch this movie, that you can keep our thoughts in mind, see from a different lens, maybe, that we've been able to share ours. I think Schrader is saying a lot here that could speak, and does, and is very alive, even as it's just shrouded in death and bleakness and despair. I think it ultimately ends on a good note, and that's what we all need. It's what we're longing for. Is how should we live? So, thank
Absolutely.
you, Swart,
Thank you. This has
for
been
being
great.
with me today, and we'll see you at the movies.